Well, hi everyone, and welcome to Module 5, Week 5. This is a look at our reading for this week. I still cannot believe that we are already on Module 5. This time is just going by so fast. So the reading for this week is Chapter 5, Project Planning, the Scope of Work and the Work Breakdown Structure. So something we want to talk about right off the bat is the triple constraint. Now the triple constraint is what project managers spend the most of their time working on to actually control and manage and to keep in balance. The triple constraint deals with the scope of work, the schedule, and the budget. And what we find is that when one of these areas is out of balance, it impacts the overall project. So let me talk a little bit about what we mean by scope, schedule, and budget. We're going to start learning about the scope of work this week, and we're going to start also scheduling that scope of work, decomposing work into tasks and activities, and then setting durations and schedules for that. Well, as we go through our project, if additional work is added to the project, needless to say, you're going to need more time and you're going to need more budget. Or, for example, if you have a project that might be impacted by weather, so something that you're doing outside, or possibly a project that needs raw materials that you had to order and buy from an organization, and they shipped them, but the shipping the material didn't arrive on time. As a matter of fact, it arrived very late and delayed the project. Or maybe originally when you did your estimating of how much budget was needed for a particular area, maybe those raw materials that you had to buy turned out it cost more money. They had a price increase, it cost more money, or maybe shipping wasn't considered budgeted, and it ended up costing a lot more. Well, what happens is if you have an area of scope, it's going to impact budget. It's going to impact schedule. If you have an area of schedule, for example, raw materials not arriving on time, it can absolutely cause problems with your budget. Maybe you've got people standing around that you have to pay to work, and they're not able to work, but you still have to pay them because they're dedicated to the project. So you can see how when you have a problem in one area, it can actually impact the other areas. So our project managers, we spend the majority of our time working on keeping the triple constraint balanced and working those areas or problems within the triple constraint. So the scope of work is basically all of the work that needs to be done as a result of the project. Well, how do we determine what needs to be done as a result of the project? Well, what we do is we collect requirements. And especially in IT projects, we're really focused on collecting requirements. And those requirements that we collect become our scope of work, what we're going to actually do as a result of the project. We gather requirements by interviewing people, by getting information from our project sponsor. We may do surveys. We may actually directly observe the work that is being done in order to determine what some of the requirements might be as we're defining, say we're defining a system, we're automating a process. Well, best way we can figure out how to automate the process is by watching the work that's being done. So direct observation is a great way to look at that. And a statement of work is basically a narrative description of the project, and a scope statement is another way that we define project boundaries. Now, all projects have boundaries, or all scope statements should have boundaries. Boundary is what will and will not be done as a result of the project. It's every bit as much important to specify what will not be done, because later on when somebody wants to change the scope, it's good to know what was agreed upon that would not be included in the scope of work. Now, project scopes must be verified, validated, and formally accepted. If a project scope is not formally accepted by your project sponsor, you shouldn't consider it to be a valid scope of work. Your scope, when it is approved, verified, and validated, it now needs to be controlled. And that helps avoid things like scope creep. If you've ever heard that term before, scope creep, that's when we start off a project, and as the project moves along, well, gee, wouldn't it be great if we added this? And wow, I could see how it would be wonderful if we did that. And the next thing you know, the scope of work gets out of control. So we have formal change control processes that we put in place to manage the scope and make sure that any changes to the scope of work are formally approved. Once we have defined our scope of work, we break down that scope of work into smaller components. We decompose that into activities or tasks that need to be completed by the project. We define the deliverables and we define the milestones of the project as we decompose these activities or the scope of work into activities and tasks. We also organize it into meaningful ways that we're going to step through. We schedule in logical manner. For example, if we're doing a software development project, well, we're certainly not going to start coding the software before we've gathered requirements. So sequencing is every bit as important in these tasks and activities. So basically your work breakdown structure lists these tasks and activities that need to be completed by the project. We work to decompose that scope of work into smaller components. We define deliverables and milestones. Check out figure 8, 5.8 and 5.9. There's some really good examples of the work breakdown structure. So what do you need to know for this week? We need to understand what the triple constraint is, why it's important, and why it's important that we manage it, and how it impacts our overall project success. Understand what it is, what scope of work is, and how to define a good scope statement, and understand how that scope statement feeds your work breakdown structure, because we decompose the scope of work into milestones, deliverables, activities, and tasks that become our work breakdown structure. Understand different techniques for estimating activity duration. This is going to be really important. And also understand about sequencing work. So continue on to the next video, and in the next video I'm going to discuss your assignments for this week.